Commander Thexavar floated in his command chair, his 6 eyes scanning the holographic display before him. The Keltharian war fleet had been patrolling this sector for weeks, hunting for easy targets and valuable salvage. Today, their sensors had picked up something interesting. "Sir, we have a derelict vessel at coordinate 749, reported his tactical officer, her voice crackling through the ship's communication system. "It appears to be human in origin." Thexvar's mandibles clicked together in what his species considered a smile. Humans were always good for salvage. Their technology was primitive, but their ships often carried useful materials, and sometimes even survivors who could be sold in the Outer Rim slave markets. The main screen shifted to show the drifting vessel. It was clearly human-made, with the typical blocky design that the young species favored. The hull was scorched and pitted, with what looked like battle damage. Massive tears in the metal plating suggested the ship had been through a serious fight. Debris floated around it like a dark cloud. "Life signs?" Thexvar asked, already knowing the answer. Humans were fragile creatures. Their ships rarely survived long in the vacuum of space without proper maintenance. "Minimal power readings, sir. Backup systems only. No active communications or defensive systems. The ship appears to have been drifting for several years based on its trajectory." Thexvar studied the readings more carefully. The vessel was large for a human ship, probably a military cruiser or heavy transport. The registry information that flickered on his screen identified it as the Eternal Dawn, with a crew complement of 200 souls, all presumably dead by now. The ship's database also showed typical human crew names scattered throughout the manifest: Jin-Ho, Da-Yun, Su-Jin, Yuri, Haiwan, Taemin, simple names from their homeworld, each carrying meanings like precious, great kindness, or eternal beauty. Humans were oddly sentimental about such things, unlike the practical naming conventions of more advanced species. Another primitive, human warship, Thexvar muttered to himself, his voice carrying the contempt that most advanced species felt for humanity. The humans had only been in space for a few centuries, barely long enough to master basic faster-than-light travel. Their weapons were crude, their ships were inefficient, and their military tactics were straightforward to the point of being predictable. "Sir, shall we proceed with salvage operations?" his tactical officer asked. Thexavar nodded, already calculating the potential profit. Human ships might be primitive, but their materials could be recycled and sold. Their computer systems, while basic, often contained useful navigation data about trade routes and colony locations. Even their personal effects had value in certain markets. "Prepare a boarding party," he ordered, his voice filled with the confidence that came from easy prey. "Standard salvage protocol: 6 soldiers, full atmospheric suits, cutting tools, and data extraction equipment. This should be simple work." The boarding team would dock with the human vessel, cut through any sealed compartments and strip everything of value. If they were lucky, they might even find some humans still alive in emergency shelters or stasis pods. Living humans commanded good prices in the right markets, especially if they were young and healthy. As his crew prepared for the boarding operation, Thexvar allowed himself to relax. This was exactly the kind of easy salvage that made patrol, duty profitable. A defenseless human ship, drifting helplessly in space, waiting to be picked clean like bones in the desert. He had no idea how wrong he was. The boarding shuttle attached to the human vessel with a metallic clang that echoed through both ships. Team leader Zixthon checked his atmospheric suit one final time before stepping through the airlock. His 5-member squad followed behind, their heavy boots clanking against the metal deck plates of the human ship. The first thing that struck him was the silence. Not the dead silence of a ship without power, but something else entirely. There was a low, almost musical humming that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. The emergency lighting cast long shadows down empty corridors, but the lights themselves were still functioning after years of supposed abandonment. "Command, we're inside the target vessel," Zixthon reported through his communicator. Initial sweep shows, wait, something's not right here. His team spread out, checking compartments and scanning for life signs. What they found defied everything they knew about human technology and survival capabilities. Instead of the frozen corpses they expected, their sensors were detecting active life signs throughout the ship. "Sir, you need to see this," called out Kex Maria, his second in command. Her voice carried a note of confusion that immediately put Zixthon on alert. He followed her deeper into the ship, past empty mess halls and abandoned duty stations, until they reached what appeared to be the vessel's main cargo bay. But it wasn't, filled with cargo. Instead, the massive space had been converted into something that looked like a high-tech medical facility. Row after row of sleek, cylindrical pods lined the bay, each one roughly the size of a human body. The pods were made of some kind of translucent material that glowed with a soft blue light. Through the transparent surfaces, Zixthon could see the sleeping forms of humans inside. "By the void," he whispered, stepping closer to examine the nearest. The nameplate on the pod read Jin Ho, in both human script and universal translation. Inside, a young human male lay peacefully, his chest rising and falling in slow, rhythmic breaths. Monitoring displays showed his vital signs: heart rate, brain activity, oxygen levels, all stable and healthy. Zixthon moved to the next pod. Da-un, read the nameplate. A human female also sleeping peacefully. Then another, Mi-Ra, and another, Su-Jin. Every pod contained a living, breathing human being in what appeared to be some kind of artificial sleep. "Sir, this is impossible," Kex Maria said, running her scanner over the stasis equipment. "According to our intelligence reports, human stasis technology is primitive at best. They can barely keep someone alive for a few days, let alone years." Zixthon was examining the power systems that fed the pods. The energy readings were unlike anything in their database of human technology. The power cells should have been drained long ago, yet they showed nearly full capacity. Even more puzzling, the energy signatures didn't match any known human power source. "Command, we have a situation," he reported, his voice tight with concern. "The human crew is alive. All 200 of them are in stasis pods that shouldn't exist." Commander Thexvar's voice crackled through the communicator, filled with disbelief. "Repeat that, team leader." "The humans are alive, sir. They're in some kind of advanced stasis system. The power requirements alone should have drained their backup systems within months, but these pods have been running for years, decades even." Zixthon walked between the rows of sleeping humans, his mind racing. Every pod hummed with the same strange energy that filled the ship. The technology was far beyond what humans should have been capable of creating. The power systems, the life support, the neural monitoring equipment. It all suggested a level of advancement that contradicted everything they knew about human capabilities. "Sir, there's something else," Kex Maria called out from across the bay. "These pods aren't just keeping them alive. Look at these neural activity readings." Zixthon hurried over to see what she had discovered. The displays showed brainwave patterns unlike anything he had seen before. The sleeping humans weren't just unconscious, their minds were active, almost hyperactive. The neural patterns suggested intense mental activity, as if they were not just dreaming but learning. Something here was very, very wrong. Back aboard the Keltharian flagship, Chief Analyst Velkara stared at her screen in growing disbelief. She had run the deep structure scan 3 times, and each result was more puzzling than the last. The readings from the human vessel made no sense according to everything they knew about human technology. "Commander Thexvar, you need to see this immediately," she called out, her voice tight with concern. Thexvar floated over to her station, his 6 eyes focusing on the holographic display that showed a detailed breakdown of the human ship's construction. What he saw there made his blood run cold. "This can't be right," he muttered, studying the analysis. "Run it again." "I've already run it 4 times, sir. The results are consistent." Velkara highlighted sections of the ship's hull on her display. "The outer plating appears to be standard human durasteel, but underneath there are materials I can't identify. Composite alloys that our scanners can barely penetrate." She zoomed in on cross-sections of the ship's structure. Where they expected to see simple human construction techniques, they found something far more sophisticated. The hull wasn't just metal plates welded together. It was a complex layered system with materials that seemed to shift and adapt under their scanning beams. "Our most advanced sensors are being deflected," Velkara continued, pointing to areas where their scans simply stopped working. "It's as if the ship is designed to hide its true nature from exactly the kind of analysis we're performing." Thexvar felt a chill run down his spine. What about the power systems? How are those stasis pods still functioning? Velkara brought up another display, this one showing energy flow patterns throughout the human vessel. That's where it gets really strange, sir. The pods aren't just individual units. They're all connected to each other through some kind of network we can't fully understand. The hologram showed thin lines of energy connecting each stasis pod to every other pod, creating a web-like pattern that pulsed with synchronized activity. The energy signatures were unlike anything in their database of known technologies. Every human brain is showing the same neural patterns, she explained, highlighting the brain activity readings from different pods. They're not just sleeping independently. They're connected to something, sharing information, processing data together. Thexvar studied the readings with growing alarm. The implications were staggering. You're saying their minds are linked? All 200 of them? It appears so, sir. But it's more than just mental connection. Look at these data flows. Velkara pointed to streams of information moving between the pods at incredible speeds. They're processing and sharing massive amounts of data. The computational power involved should be impossible for human brains to handle. The display showed information flowing back and forth between the sleeping humans at rates that would challenge their most advanced computer systems. Whatever the humans were doing in their artificial sleep, it involved processing information on a scale that defied belief. Sir, there's something else, Velkara said, her voice dropping to almost a whisper. The network isn't contained within the ship. She expanded the scan to show energy signatures extending beyond the hull of the human vessel. Faint data streams reached out into space, connecting to something else. Are you telling me this ship is communicating with other vessels? Thexvar demanded. I can't be certain, sir, but the patterns suggest long-range data transmission. If there are other human ships out there with similar setups, they could all be connected to the same network. The commander felt his confidence evaporating. What they had thought was a simple salvage operation was turning into something far more complex and dangerous. The sleeping humans weren't helpless survivors. They were part of some kind of collective intelligence that spanned multiple ships and potentially vast distances. How long would it take to establish this kind of network? He asked. Velkara ran quick calculations on her secondary screen. Based on the complexity and integration levels we're seeing, years, sir, maybe decades. This wasn't something they built recently. This system has been developing and growing for a very long time. Thexvar realized with growing horror that they might have stumbled into something far beyond their understanding. The primitive humans had been planning something on a scale they had never imagined, and now they were beginning to wake up. The soft hiss of pressurizing gases echoed through the cargo bay as Pod 17 began its awakening sequence. Zixthon and his boarding team stepped back instinctively, their weapons ready but not yet drawn. They had been studying the sleeping humans for over an hour, trying to understand the impossible technology that kept them alive. Now one of them was waking up. The transparent cover of the pod slid back smoothly, revealing the young human woman inside. She appeared to be in her mid-20s, with short black hair and the typical features of someone from Earth's Asian regions. Her nameplate clearly read Su Jin in both human script and universal translation. What struck the Keltharian soldiers immediately was her complete lack of confusion or panic. Most beings who awakened from long-term stasis were disoriented, frightened, and needed several minutes to remember where they were. This human simply opened her eyes, took a slow breath, and sat up as if she had just finished a pleasant nap. Her dark eyes focused immediately on the alien soldiers surrounding her pod. She showed no fear, no surprise, no shock at seeing members of a species that had never made contact with humanity before. Instead, she looked at them with what appeared to be mild curiosity, as if she had been expecting them all along. How long? She asked, her voice clear and steady. Zixthon nearly dropped his scanner. The woman had spoken in perfect Keltharian. Not just the words, but with the proper tonal inflections and grammatical structure that took most aliens years to master. Her accent was flawless, as if she had been speaking their language her entire life. The team leader activated his communicator with trembling hands. Command, the human is awake and she's speaking our language. Commander Thexavar's voice crackled through the comm system, filled with disbelief. "That's impossible. Humans have never had contact with our species. Our languages share no common roots." But Sujin had heard the conversation through the comm system. She turned her attention directly to the communication device, as if she could see through it to the Keltharian commander on the other ship. "You've been drifting for 37 years, Thexavar said through the communicator, his voice tight with confusion and growing alarm. "How do you speak our language? How do you even know we exist?" The human woman smiled then, and it was not the confused smile of someone trying to make sense of a strange situation. It was the knowing smile of someone who held secrets, someone who understood far more than she was revealing. "Long enough to learn everything we needed to know about you," she replied, still speaking flawless Keltharian. Sujin slowly swung her legs over the side of the stasis pod and stood up. She moved with confident grace, showing no signs of the muscle weakness or disorientation that should have affected someone who had been in artificial sleep for decades. Her body language suggested complete awareness of her surroundings and total control of the situation. 37 years, she repeated thoughtfully, as if confirming something she already suspected. "Yes, that would be about right." Zixthon found his voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. "About right for what?" The human woman looked at each of the Keltharian soldiers in turn, studying their faces, their equipment, their positions. Her eyes lingered on their weapons, their communication devices, their scanning equipment. It was as if she was cataloging every detail, comparing what she saw to information she already possessed. "For the first phase to be complete," she said simply. Around the cargo bay, other stasis pods began to show signs of activity. Status lights that had been steady blue for decades started to shift to amber, then to green. The humming sound that filled the ship grew slightly louder, more complex, as if the network connecting all the sleeping humans was becoming more active. "You should probably call for reinforcements," Sujin suggested, her tone almost conversational. "You're going to need them." Before anyone could ask what she meant, more pods began to open. The soft hiss of pressurizing gases echoed throughout. The bay's other humans started their awakening sequence. Jin Hodayan Mira Taimin. One by one, the sleeping crew of the Eternal Dawn began to wake up, and every single one of them opened their eyes with the same calm confidence, the same knowing smile, as if they had all been dreaming the same. Dream for 37 years, a dream about the species that would eventually find them. Sujin stepped down from her stasis pod with fluid grace, completely ignoring the weapons pointed at her by the Keltharian boarding team. She walked calmly between the rows of awakening humans, her bare feet making no sound on the cold metal deck. The alien soldiers found themselves backing away despite their training, unsettled by her complete confidence in what should have been a terrifying situation. "While we slept, we studied," she explained, her voice carrying easily through the vast cargo bay. Her tone was conversational, almost friendly, as if she were giving a tour to curious visitors rather than addressing armed. Invader Zixthon kept his weapon trained on her, but his hands were shaking. "Studied what? You've been unconscious for decades." Sujin paused beside another pod where a man named Jin Wu was beginning to stir. She placed her hand gently on the transparent surface, and the pod's awakening sequence seemed to accelerate in response to her touch. "Unconscious?" She laughed, a sound that was both musical and somehow chilling. "Our bodies slept, yes. But our minds have been busier than you could possibly imagine." She gestured toward the rows of pods where more humans were beginning to wake. "Every transmission your species has ever sent into space, we intercepted them. Every piece of technology your traders brought to the outer colonies, we analyzed it. Every military communication, every diplomatic message, every casual conversation between your ships. We listened to it all." The implications of her words hit Zixthon like a physical blow. "That's impossible. Our communications are encrypted with quantum algorithms, which we broke 17 years ago," Sujin replied matter-of-factly. "Your quantum encryption has a fundamental flaw in its 7th layer matrix. We've been reading your secure communications for nearly 2 decades. By now, dozens of other humans were sitting up in their pods. Dayun, a woman with graying hair, stretched slowly and spoke her first words in perfect Keltharian. The flaw is in how you generate your random number seeds, very predictable once you understand the pattern. Another awakening human, Haywan, added with a smile. We particularly enjoyed reading Admiral Kextalar's private messages to his mistress. Quite romantic, really. Zixthon felt his blood turn to ice. Admiral Kextalar was one of their most senior military commanders, and his communications were supposed to be among the most secure in their entire fleet. Sujin continued her casual stroll through the bay, now speaking to Commander Thexvar through the open communication channel. We've been analyzing Keltharian military doctrine for decades, Commander. Your ship designs have some interesting weaknesses. Did you know that your primary reactors can be overloaded by sending a specific frequency pulse through your sensor? Arrays! On the flagship, Thexvar was frantically ordering his technical crew to verify their reactor shielding. The human couldn't possibly know such detailed information about their most advanced warships. Your tactical patterns are quite predictable too, added Tamin, a young man who was now standing beside his pod. You always attack in three-wave formations, with heavy cruisers leading and support vessels following at exactly 2.7-kilometer intervals. You've used the same attack pattern in every major engagement for the past 50 years. Mira, stretching her arms as she woke up, contributed her own observation. The psychological profiles of your officer corps were particularly interesting to study. Keltharians have a deep-seated fear of enclosed spaces, something about your evolutionary development in the vast plains of your homeworld. Very useful information for designing effective interrogation techniques. Sujin reached the center of the bay, where a holographic display had materialized seemingly from nowhere. It showed detailed schematics of Keltharian ships, star charts, of their territories, and what appeared to be complete organizational charts of their military hierarchy. You see, the beauty of networked minds is that we can process information at rates far beyond what individual brains can handle, she explained. While our bodies rested in stasis, our connected consciousness spent every moment of those 37 years learning everything there is to know about your civilization. The display shifted to show intercept patterns of communication networks spanning multiple star systems. We know the names of your families, the locations of your colonies, the weaknesses in your defenses. We know which of your admirals can be bribed, which politicians have embarrassing secrets, and which trade routes are most vulnerable to disruption. Jin Wu, now fully awake, stood beside Su Jin and addressed the boarding team directly. The most interesting discovery was how your entire society operates on predictable cycles. Economic, military, social. Everything follows patterns that become quite obvious when you have decades to study them from the outside. Zixthon realized with growing horror that they hadn't discovered a helpless derelict ship. They had walked into a trap that had been decades in the making. The primitive humans had been learning, planning, and preparing while appearing completely helpless, and now they were awake. The first sign that something was dramatically wrong came when lights began flashing throughout the human vessel. Not the red emergency lights that indicated system failures, but brilliant blue pulses that seemed to flow through the walls themselves like liquid electricity. The gentle humming that had filled the ship since the boarding team arrived suddenly grew louder, deeper, more purposeful. Zixthon spun around as his scanner began screaming warnings. "Command, something's happening. The ship's power levels are spiking across all systems." On the Keltharian flagship, Chief Analyst Velkara watched her displays in growing alarm as the human vessel's energy signature began to climb at impossible rates. "Sir, their power output just increased by 300%, 400. It's still climbing." But the most shocking change was happening to the ship itself. The scarred and damaged hull that had convinced them this was a helpless derelict began to shimmer like water in sunlight. The massive tiers in the metal plating flickered and wavered, revealing themselves to be nothing more than elaborate illusions. Advanced holographic projectors hidden throughout the hull shut down their camouflage systems, and the true nature of the human vessel was revealed. Where they had seen battle damage and structural weakness, there was now smooth, unmarked armor plating that gleamed with an inner light. The ship wasn't damaged at all. It had been deliberately disguised to appear weak and vulnerable. Impossible. Thexvar whispered from his command chair as he watched the transformation through his fleet's sensors. No human technology can generate holographic fields that sophisticated. On the human ship, more awakening crew members began to stand and stretch. A woman with the nameplate Yuri climbed out of her pod and addressed the stunned Keltharian boarding team with a predatory smile. "You thought we were prey," she said, her voice carrying the same perfect Keltharian accent as the others. "That was your first mistake. We've been studying predators for a very long time." As if responding to her words, weapon ports began opening all along the ship's hull. But these weren't the crude projectile launchers or basic energy weapons that Keltharian intelligence expected from human vessels. Instead, sleek arrays of advanced weaponry emerged from hidden compartments, their designs unlike anything in their databases. "Sir, I'm reading plasma cannons, antimatter projectors, and what appears to be some kind of gravitational manipulation system," Velkara reported, her voice shaking. "These weapon signatures are beyond anything we've encountered before." The ship's transformation continued as more systems came online. Shield generators that had been completely hidden suddenly activated, creating energy barriers that made the Keltharian flagship's defenses look primitive by comparison. Engine systems that hadn't appeared on any of their scans began powering up, generating thrust capabilities that defied their understanding of physics. "How is this possible?" Zixthon demanded, his weapons still trained on Sujin, but his confidence completely shattered. Another awakening human, a man named Donghyun, answered while casually examining his hands as if checking that everything was still working properly. 37 years is a long time to perfect technology, especially when you have 200 brilliant minds working together in accelerated time. "Our bodies aged slowly in stasis," added Haiwon, now standing beside her pod and stretching, like someone who had just woken from a pleasant nap. "But our minds experienced decades of concentrated research and development. We solved problems that would have taken centuries of normal time." Yuri walked over to what had appeared to be a damaged control panel, but was now revealed as an advanced command interface. She placed her hand on its surface, and immediately holographic displays filled the air around them, showing real-time tactical information about the Keltharian fleet. "We know exactly how many ships you brought," she said conversationally. 12. "Heavy cruisers, 6 destroyers, and your flagship. We know their weapon capabilities, their shield frequencies, and the personal fears of every officer commanding them." On the main display, detailed schematics of the Keltharian vessels appeared, complete with highlighted weak points and tactical vulnerabilities. The information was so precise and complete that it looked like it had come from their own military databases. "The beautiful thing about appearing helpless," Sujin explained, now standing at the center of the cargo bay as if she owned it, "is that predators always come close enough to be studied. You've been scanning us, analyzing us, planning how to exploit us. What you didn't realize is that we were doing the same thing to you." The ship's true power signature was now fully visible to the Keltharian sensors, and the readings made their most advanced warship look like a child's toy by comparison. The energy output alone should have been impossible for a vessel of its size, but somehow the humans had managed to pack the destructive capability of an entire battle fleet into a single ship. "Welcome aboard the Eternal Dawn," Yuri said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "We've been waiting a very long time to meet you." The space around the Keltharian fleet began to shimmer like heat waves rising from hot pavement. At first, it seemed like a sensor malfunction, or perhaps interference, from the human ship's newly revealed technology. But then the shimmering grew more intense, more purposeful, until reality itself seemed to bend and twist. Commander Thexvar watched his tactical display with growing horror as his sensors began detecting massive objects materializing out of nowhere. One moment there was empty space, and the next, a sleek human vessel hung silently in the void, its hull gleaming with the same advanced materials as the Eternal Dawn. "Sir, I'm reading multiple contacts." Velkara's voice cracked with panic. "Dozens of them, they're appearing all around us." More ships decloaked in rapid succession, their advanced stealth systems shutting down to reveal a fleet that had been hiding in plain sight. Each vessel was roughly the same size as the Eternal Dawn, but their designs varied slightly, as if each one had been optimized for different purposes. The silent observer materialized off their starboard bow, its hull studded with sensor arrays that could probably map every rivet on the Keltharian ships. The deep learning appeared to port, its smooth surface broken only by what looked like massive data processing nodes. The patient hunter decloaked directly ahead, its weapon systems already powered and aimed at the Keltharian flagship. "How many?" Thexvar demanded, his voice barely above a whisper. "I count 117. Ships, sir. No, wait. More are still appearing. 123, 131. Velkara's hands flew over her controls as she tried to track the growing fleet. "Sir, they've completely surrounded us." On the Eternal Dawn, Su-Jin watched the revelation of their true numbers with quiet satisfaction. Through the network that connected all the human ships, she could feel her fellow crew members awakening from their decades of sleep. On every vessel, pods were opening, and humans were stretching and preparing for what came next. "Every species makes the same mistake," she said, speaking not just to the Keltharian boarding team, but to every alien who could hear their communications. "You see our individual weakness and miss our collective strength." She gestured toward the viewports where the newly revealed human fleet hung in space like a constellation of silent predators. "While you conquered worlds and expanded your territories, we learned everything there was to know about you. While you built bigger weapons and stronger ships, we studied how your minds work, how your societies function, how your fears control you." Jinwoo, now fully alert and standing beside the command interfaces, added his own explanation. "Each ship in our fleet specialized in different types of intelligence gathering. The silent observer focused on military communications and tactical analysis. The deep learning concentrated on technology and scientific data. The patient hunter studied psychological profiles and social structures." Yuri touched her control panel, and the main display showed a galaxy-wide map dotted with thousands of points of light. "For 37 years, ships like ours have been positioned throughout the galaxy, always appearing helpless, always seeming defeated. Refugee vessels seeking sanctuary, damaged ships requesting assistance, trading vessels offering rare goods at bargain prices." The map zoomed in to show specific sectors where human ships had been operating. Each one had been perfectly positioned to observe major trade routes, military installations, and political centers of various alien civilizations. "The defeated human refugees that your people took in." Su-Jin's smile grew wider. "They were gathering intelligence, the human traders selling exotic goods at your markets. They were mapping your economic systems, the human scientists requesting asylum after their homeworlds were destroyed. They were studying your technology." On the Keltharian flagship, the full scope of what they faced was becoming clear. These weren't just ships. They were nodes in a vast intelligence network that had been operating under everyone's noses for decades. Every major power in the galaxy had unknowingly hosted human observers, thinking they were helping helpless refugees or conducting profitable trade. "We learned that Keltharians fear enclosed spaces because of ancestral memories of cave-dwelling predators," Dayun said matter-of-factly. "The Zetherian Empire can be destabilized by disrupting their food supply chains. The hegemony of Krix depends entirely on 3 aging hyperspace relays that haven't been properly maintained in 40 years. Taemin consulted a holographic display that had appeared near his pod. Every weakness, every fear, every critical vulnerability of every major civilization in the galaxy. We've catalogued it all, analyzed it all, and prepared countermeasures for it all. The truth was staggering in its scope and audacity. While the galaxy's powers had been fighting each other for territory and resources, humanity had been quietly building the most comprehensive intelligence network in galactic history. They had turned their apparent defeat into their greatest advantage, using the galaxy's own arrogance and assumptions against them. The beautiful thing about being underestimated, Su-Jin concluded, is that no one bothers to watch you carefully. You've all been so busy conquering that you forgot to wonder what the conquered might be planning. Around them, more than 150 human ships hung in perfect formation, their crews awakening after decades of patient preparation. The hunters had finally revealed themselves, and they had been planning this moment for a very long time. Silence that followed Su-Jin's revelation stretched across space like a held breath. On the Keltharian flagship, Commander Thexvar stared at his tactical display, watching as more and more human vessels continued to decloak around his fleet. The numbers kept climbing: 200, 250, 300 ships. Each one was perfectly positioned to cut off any escape route or counterattack. Sujin stepped closer to the communication panel, her voice carrying clearly to every ship in the Keltharian fleet. When she spoke, it was with the calm authority of someone who held all the cards in a game that others were just beginning to understand they were playing. "Join us," she said simply, the words hanging in the air like a challenge. "Or face the consequences of underestimating Earth's children." Her tone wasn't threatening or aggressive. If anything, it sounded almost sad, as if she genuinely regretted having to offer such a stark choice. But there was an underlying steel in her voice that made it clear this wasn't a negotiation. It was an ultimatum. "We know everything about you," she continued, walking slowly among the awakening humans in the cargo bay. "Your supply routes that keep your colonies fed, your defense platforms that protect your homeworlds, your political fractures that keep your government barely functioning." Yuri touched her control interface, and suddenly the viewports throughout both ships displayed real-time images from across Keltharian space. Supply convoys moving through supposedly secure hyperspace lanes, with human vessels trailing discreetly. Behind them, defense stations around major colonies with what appeared to be Keltharian maintenance ships docked nearby. Ships that now revealed themselves to be human vessels in disguise. "We've been your harmless refugees for 30 years, Jinwoo said, his voice carrying a bitter edge. "The survivors you so generously allowed to settle on your outer colonies. The traders you permitted to operate in your markets. The scientists you graciously allowed to study in your universities." The images continued to shift, showing human faces that the Keltharian databases had classified as refugees, asylum seekers, and immigrant workers. But now those same faces were speaking into communication devices, clearly coordinating with the fleet that surrounded them. Every refugee camp, every trade station, every diplomatic outpost, Da-Un added, stretching as she stepped out of her pod. "We've been there watching, learning, preparing. Your people thought they were being charitable by helping the poor defeated humans. You never suspected that those humans were sending detailed reports about everything they observed." On his flagship, Thexvar realized with growing horror that his civilization had been thoroughly infiltrated. The humans hadn't just been studying them from a distance. They had been living among them, working alongside them, earning their trust while systematically mapping every aspect of Keltharian society. "Your military academy on Kelth Prime has 17 human instructors," Taemin said conversationally, consulting a holographic display. "They've been teaching your young officers tactics and strategy for the past 15 years. Funny thing about being a teacher, you learn so much about how your students think. Your primary agricultural world, Keltharan, employs over 3,000 human agricultural specialists," added Hai Wan. "They know exactly how to disrupt your food production without anyone suspecting sabotage. A small change in soil treatment. Here, a minor adjustment to irrigation systems there. Your people would starve slowly and think it was just bad luck." Sujin paused in front of the main viewport, looking out at the Keltharian fleet that was now completely surrounded and outgunned. "The galaxy's balance of power shifted 37 years ago, when we made the decision to sacrifice a generation to secure humanity's future. You just didn't realize it yet." Through the viewport, even more human ships became visible. These weren't the advanced warships that had been hiding in space. These were the disguised vessels that had been operating openly within Keltharian territory for decades. Cargo haulers that had been mapping supply routes, passenger transports that had been studying population centers, medical ships that had been analyzing biological vulnerabilities. Every major civilization in the galaxy is facing the same choice. "Right now," Yuri said, her hand resting on her control panel. "On every world, in every system, human refugees are revealing their true purpose. The network we built isn't just about gathering information, it's about being in position to act on that information." The communication channels suddenly filled with panicked transmissions from across Keltharian space. Reports of human vessels revealing themselves near critical infrastructure, accounts of trusted human workers suddenly displaying knowledge and capabilities far beyond what anyone had suspected. Emergency calls from colony governors who were realizing that their most helpful advisors had been spies all along. "You can fight us," Sujin said, turning back to address the Keltharian commander directly. "But you'll be fighting an enemy that knows you better than you know yourself. An enemy that has people positioned throughout your society. People you've learned to trust and depend on." She paused, letting the weight of their situation sink in. "Or you can accept that the age of stronger species dominating weaker ones is over. Join us in building something better. A galaxy where intelligence and cooperation matter more than brute force and conquest." The choice was clear, but for the Keltharians it was no choice at all. They were surrounded, infiltrated, and outmaneuvered by an enemy they had never taken seriously. Earth's children had grown up, and they were nothing like what anyone had expected. The emergency hyperspace beacon that Commander Thexvar had activated hours earlier finally brought results, but not the kind he had hoped for. 3 additional Keltharian battle fleets dropped out of hyperspace at maximum combat readiness, their weapons charged and shields raised, expecting to rescue their comrades from a desperate human attack. Instead, they found something that shattered their understanding of warfare itself. Admiral Kextala, commanding the lead reinforcement fleet, opened communication channels immediately. "Thexvar, report. We detected your distress signal and came as quickly as possible. What's your tactical situation?" But before Thexvar could respond, his communication officer was frantically trying to get his attention. "Sir, we're receiving priority messages from Kelth Prime, from all our major colonies. The situation is... It's everywhere, sir. The main display filled with incoming reports from across Keltharian space. On Kelth Prime, their heavily defended homeworld, Jinsu had revealed himself to be far more than the skilled shipyard worker everyone thought he was. For 12 years he had been maintaining and repairing their most advanced warships, while secretly mapping every design weakness and defensive vulnerability. "He knows our ships better than our own engineers," came the panicked report from the orbital shipyards. "He's been documenting every modification, every upgrade, every tactical system we've installed. He could disable our entire fleet from the inside." From the communications center on their primary military base, similar reports arrived about Yunji, who had been working as a communications specialist for 8 years. She hadn't just been relaying messages, she had been analyzing communication patterns, studying command structures, and mapping the entire military hierarchy of the Keltharian forces. "She knows every code, every frequency, every security protocol," the base commander reported, his voice shaking. "She could shut down our communications network across 3 sectors with a few keystrokes." The reports kept flooding in from every major installation and colony. Taemin, who had been teaching tactical theory at their most prestigious military academy, had been shaping the strategic thinking of an entire generation of Keltharian officers. While appearing to help them become better soldiers, he had been studying how their minds worked, how they made decisions under pressure, how they could be predicted and countered. 20 years, Admiral Kextala whispered as the scope of the human infiltration became clear. "They've been among us for 20 years or more, in our most secure facilities, teaching our children, maintaining our weapons, processing our communications." On the eternal dawn, Sujin watched the growing chaos with quiet satisfaction. Through the network that connected all human operatives across the galaxy, she could feel the moment of revelation happening on thousands of worlds simultaneously. Decades of careful preparation were finally paying off. The humans hadn't conquered through massive fleets or devastating weapons. They had won through patience, learning, and the kind of long-term thinking that only a species facing extinction could master. While other civilizations planned in terms of years or decades, humanity had planned in terms of generations. "Every species in the galaxy made the same mistake," Yuri observed, watching the Keltharian reinforcement fleets try to process what they were facing. They saw individual humans as weak, so they assumed all humans were weak. They never considered what we could accomplish, by working together over extended periods. Jinwoo nodded in agreement. When you're facing extinction, you learn to think differently. Short-term victories don't matter. Only long-term survival counts. So we planned for survival, and then we planned for more than survival. Da-un was monitoring communication channels across multiple sectors. The Zitherian Empire is reporting the same pattern, so is the hegemony of Krix. Every major power is discovering that their most trusted human advisors were actually intelligence operatives. The beauty of the human strategy was its simplicity. By appearing weak and defeated, they had been welcomed into the heart of every major civilization. Their apparent desperation had made them seem harmless, their gratitude had made them seem loyal, and their competence had made them seem valuable. But all along they had been building the most comprehensive intelligence network in galactic history. Sujin walked to the communication console and activated a channel that reached every human operative across known space. Her voice was calm, professional, carrying the authority of someone who had waited 37 years for this moment. All cells. This is Eternal Dawn. Phase 1 complete. Begin Phase 2. Across the galaxy, thousands of humans who had spent decades in deep cover received the signal they had been waiting for. The reconnaissance phase was over. The action phase was beginning. The Keltharian fleets hung helplessly in space, surrounded by enemies they had never seen coming, infiltrated by operatives they had trusted completely, outmaneuvered by a strategy that had taken longer to execute than most civilizations had existed. The prey had become the predator, and the hunt had been going on far longer than anyone suspected. Earth's children had learned patience from necessity, intelligence from desperation, and unity from the edge of extinction. Now they were ready to reshape the galaxy in their own image. The age of humanity had begun.